Today I'm going to show you some features of a new pattern I've just designed for Kiss looms. It's called the Kiss Crescent Scarf. I made mine on the loom pictured, but as long as you have enough pegs, which is 43, and you can match the gauge, any Kiss loom may be used. We'll be knitting a crescent shape by means of some decreases and some short rowing. Really, this is very simple, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And the resulting scarf may be worn either with the point centered on your chest or off-centered for an asymmetrical look. It's very comfortable and it fits pretty much everybody. And I want to show you a couple of things about it, several actually, that will help you when it comes your turn to make one. This is one edge of the work. This is the other. And at first glance, they may look identical. And they are close enough to be a match, but there are some differences. And that's one of the things I want to show you, is how to achieve those differences. You can knit with your long side and your short side on either side. What we're doing is knitting a crescent shape. Let me try to spread this out and see if you can see it forming. It's a shaped strip. It's getting narrower as we go up, and it's curving as we go up. And this is why the scarf has its distinctive shape. And I believe you can see that curve starting up, and also the narrowing effect. That isn't just a perspective thing from the camera. It really is much wider down here than up above. Let me see about showing you that where I've got it folded. See? There are two things going on to change the shape. One of them is we really are working decreases, and the other is the edges are made differently. This is our short side, and this is the long side. So both of them are worked on the 5 edge stitches, but they're worked somewhat differently, and we'll just do a little bit of that now. And you'll see how they become so similar, and yet one tends to be longer than the other. Before we move on to that, let me show you my stitch marker. I'm at row 150, and I'm just moving this yarn loop up every 50 rows so that I have a starting place, so I don't have to count down to the beginning every time. For me, this works just as well or better as clicking off rows, which I tend to forget anyway. So, long side, do not slip the first stitch, knit it. Knit the first 2, in fact. There goes my row marker over. Don't worry about it, the stitch is fine and normal. And later I'll be able to just untie the row marker and move it when I hit row 200. Purl stitch 3. Knit stitch 4. Purl stitch 5. What you just saw me do is wrap stitch 4 and go on to purling stitch 5, and now I'm knitting stitch 4. Now all the way around to the other side, we'll wrap and knit normally. So I'll do these stitches, and I'll see you when I'm ready for the last 5 over here. Okay, I've knitted all the way up to here. Now we need to work on the last 5 stitches. And just as in the case of the long side, the short side has purl 1 for the 5th stitch from the edge, knit 1, purl 1 for the 3rd, and the other 2 are knits. However, they're also tucked, so it's ribbing, but the rib stitches are tucked. That means we're going to knit over stitch 1 and stitch 2, but not stitch 3 or stitch 5. We will knit over stitch 4. We're leaving loops on stitch numbers 3 and 5, counting in from the edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 and 5 are now holding spare loops. they will be knitted over, well actually purled over on the return trip, and that's what makes them tuck rib, being catching loops every other row and then being worked every other row. Here's the difference, the second difference from the long side. We're going to slip the first stitch. That means don't wrap it and don't knit it. So I'm going to knit stitch number 2 on the return trip, wrap and purl stitch number 3. So that's ready to go. Everything's knitted off. Wrap and knit stitch number 4. Wrap and purl stitch number 5. And go on knitting back around to the other 5 edge stitches. So you can see the combination of tucking on stitches 3 and 5 and slipping the initial stitch on the edge moving inward rows. We knit that stitch one moving outward towards the edge. Going this way we do knit it, going this way we slip it. Those two features together, tucking and slipping, have a tendency to shorten this edge a little bit, which it turns out is exactly what we want. I'm going to knit on around to the 5 stitches over here, and then I'll show you what they look like on the return trip. Remember, we already worked them, but only going towards the work. We haven't worked them going towards the edge. Here we are ready for the 5 edge stitches. Every row we knit stitch number 5, whether going towards the edge or away from the edge. Stitch number 4, actually I said we knit it, we purl it. We knit stitch 4, we purl stitch 3. No tucked rows, no skipped rows. 2 and 1 get knitted. And then as a quick review, we've done this already. Wrap 1 and knit it. Wrap 2 and knit it. And we go back, purl, knit, purl, and then the rest of the way around. I want to show you something about knitting stitches 1 and 2, so let me undo them. There are 2 ways to get a nice job done. The first way is what you just saw me doing. Let's see. I've finished to the edge here. Just wrap it and knit it. On a Kiss loom, it's not difficult because of the shape of the peg to get a wrap on an edge stitch. But if you prefer to do a half hitch, which is a version of a classic knot, you can make a little fold in your yarn, put a twist in it, hang that twist on the end peg, and pull it till it just tightens up enough to make a good stitch, and use that. I do not recommend mixing the 2 styles because they don't look identical along the edge. In this particular yarn with the twist of a contrasting color in it, it wouldn't really show up very much, but in a smoother yarn it would, and you want consistency. So whichever method you find easier, feel free to use. Both will make an acceptable edge. I've got my working yarn on the wrong side. Let me fix that. And we're off, going around into the work again. Couple other tricks to come. Stay tuned. It just so happens that both of the other things that you need to learn to make a success of this pattern happen on the same row this time. Because they happen at different intervals, the short rowing is, I think, at every 14 rows, and the decreasing is every 17 rows. And then we adjust slightly to make sure that we come out on an even number. But in any case, what will happen is sometimes, but not very often, the 2 things converge and happen on the same row, and this is one of those times. What we're going to do is make what's called a full-fashioned decrease, a very large one, moving all 6 of the edge stitches over one peg, starting with the 6th one from the edge, moving it to the 7th peg, which is, in this case, is around the corner on this loom, but it doesn't matter if it is or if it's not, just so you move it over to the next peg. Doing this will keep those edges that we were so neatly knitting on the 5 edge stitches intact. When we go to knit over, which we're not quite ready to do, there will be 2 loops on the 7th peg, and we'll treat them as one and knit them over at the same time. Here's the other side. Counting in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6th stitch goes to 7th peg in from the edge. 5th goes to 6th, and so on, moving in. Once they're all moved and there are no gaps anymore, there will be 2 stitches on what is now the new peg 6, and everything else will be as it was, and we can resume knitting. This time, and a few other times in the course of the knitting, what else happens on the same row is that it's time to short row. What you want to do is have previously made a note of where the center is on the loom and marked where the short rows end, rather than counting in stitches, because the number of stitches used in each short row segment is different because we keep decreasing. If we were always knitting 100 stitches and we wanted to short row on 50 of them every so often, say to make a flared skirt, then it would always be 50, but we keep decreasing here, so it won't always be 50 or any particular number. However, I made a note of this in my mind, and you could make a pencil mark if you wanted to. This is the last knitted stitch every time I short row. This one will be wrapped, and I just used the loom hole as a point of reference and set up my work so that this was true. I had more pegs than I truly needed for the scarf, so I could purposely do it so as to use my hole as the center marking point. So we wrap normally over to the stitch that is on the peg just past my marked point. Could be your pencil mark, could be a piece of tape. Now I can knit over all the stitches leading up to that. And on the way back, to prevent a hole from forming, you may have done this while knitting socks and some other things, I will wrap the next peg, moving right in this case, but I'm not going to knit it. Now we'll go back and knit to the beginning point of this row. So every so often, a row occurs that only covers about half of the stitches. That means one edge of the fabric grows faster than the other edge, which is exactly what we want to create this crescent. Last true stitch, 2 wraps on this peg, which I'll leave alone, and when I come back by, I'll knit them off at the same time. Oops, you do have to keep adjusting in your mind. I almost knitted that first stitch, but it's stitch number 5 from the edge, so of course it's purled. As soon as I get these locked down, I will show you a short rowed area, and so you can see how it looks. Here's one of them. If you read across the knitting, you can see that from this point, these are the individual rows, and from this area that looks faintly like a knot, there are twice as many rows in that same spot, 2 rather than 4. Here is how it looks from the right side. It's pretty tough to spot from the right side. That's how come we can get by with creating a curve like this and it not be unsightly. And here is our crescent forming.